Okay, so now we're ready to turn to today's subject, adaptation and aquaculture, transforming the working waterfront. We have with us Bo Marsh and Briana Warner, two leaders in Mid-Coast Maine who are rethinking lobstering, the fishing industry, the future of the Maine waterfront. And to get things started, I'm so excited to welcome them here. We're going to watch two very short videos to kind of set the stage, and then we will open the floor for a conversation. So we go first to community shellfish.
My name is Bo Marsh. I'm the owner and operator of Community Shellfish in Bremen, Maine. I'm also the founder of the Cornerstone Oyster Farm, which is right down next to our lobster dock. Cornerstone oysters are grown at our working waterfront down in Bremen, Maine, in what were once lobster pen enclosures. We felt that these obsolete structures would be unbelievably perfect to grow oysters in. The physical characteristics of these enclosures give the oyster a special environment in which to grow fine flavor and deep shell. Also adding to the wonderful flavor of the Cornerstone oyster is the unique character of the Madomic River in which they're grown. The high mud flats and the granite ledges that surround the shores give the water a special quality that is seen in the taste of the oyster. One of the unique things about oysters is the fact that they gain so much flavor from where they are grown. They take on the character of the water, they take on the character of the land surrounding that water, and that is the flavor that you find. Up and down the coast of Maine, we have many, many different rivers, and every river has a different character to it, imbuing its flavor into the seafood and particularly the oysters which grow in it. Besides the excellent flavor of the Cornerstone oyster brought by its river environment and by the enclosures in which it's grown, we have another interesting aspect that adds to the flavor and also to the mystique of the Cornerstone oyster. That is the wreck of the Cornerstone, the namesake, right to the south of the farm. This is a 19th century ship that was wrecked here back in the 1930s and has sat there ever since, giving not only the flavor of the minerals, but also we think that in every Cornerstone there is a little bit of the spirit of Cornerstone herself.
When I was 6 years of age, I started with my dad sterning on the back of his boat.
I've lobstered for 60 years.
I've been a commercial lobster fisherman for over 25 years.
If somebody told me 20 years ago that I was going to be growing kelp, I'd have probably told them they was crazy.
I would have said to them, they're crazy.
No, never thought that would happen. Yeah.
It was definitely not on my horizon.
I had no idea what kelp did.
I didn't know that I was going to be doing something good for the ocean. You know, I didn't know that at first.
It's so hard today to see what the future's gonna be as far as anything to do with the fishing industry.
Climate change and stuff does definitely scare me.
I've always had alternative fisheries.
Just in case something happens to the lobster fishery. I personally never ate kelp before I started growing it. And we all eat kelp now, my whole family. It's delicious, it really is. There's a certain reward in supplying food for people. You started it, you saw it through, and now somebody's gonna eat that. I think it gives my children a much greater appreciation for where things come from.
I've really been amazed by how much it really benefits the environment.
We don't use fertilizers, we don't need water. Everything is there and it's 100% natural.
It's Mother Nature. She's the kelp farmer.
That one little thing is like the deed that I do to kind of help give back to the planet.
Because I know what climate change is doing to the ocean. If we reverse just a teeny tiny bit of that by growing seaweed, I'll do it.
It's good for the environment, it's good to provide a great food source, but it fits into my business in the sense that I get paid to do that.
I'm doing something good for the ocean. Which does something good for me, gives me a paycheck. But spending time with my dad is probably the best part.
I just like spending time with my dad, to be able to watch and learn. He's a big role model of mine.
I feel very fortunate to be able to work with my family.
Safety for my children. I gotta look forward.
I feel hopeful. It's kind of a no-brainer to grow seaweed, and the ocean will be better for it.
I love both of these videos, and I think I want to pick up on something that I really get from the Atlantic Sea Farms video to start, and maybe ask you to expand on it, which is the sense of both the legacy of multiple generations, generation after generation working on the waterfront, working in the lobstering industry, and the major transformation that switching to aquaculture represents. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more, especially for people who are joining us and are not so familiar with Down East Maine, about the scale of lobstering, the way that families are engaged in the industry, and sort of what's the landscape of fishing in coastal Maine.
Yeah, I can start, and then Bo will certainly have a lot to add. He also has a business that works a lot on lobster processing and operates what is in essence a co-op by a different name. So Bo, definitely jump in if I say anything incorrectly, but please fill in the gaps as well. But lobster on the coast of Maine we have about 4,000 lobster license holders, and in Maine, unlike pretty much anywhere else, it's an owner-operator fishery, which means there's no fleets of boats. There's no sort of big man that has a fleet of 5 or 6 boats, and it's a bunch of people who break their backs all day with no equity in the company. In fact, what it is every person is their own business person. Every person owns their own boat. They cannot fish their boat without the license holder being on that boat. And it's for all intents and purposes, a generational fishery, because the only true way to get a license at this point in time is by doing an apprenticeship with your lobsterman family member while you're a kid, and then that's basically the only way to get a lobster license at this point. So what that means is people who are fishing that are in their early 20s, early 30s got there from going out with their father or their mother or their grandfather or their grandmother, although grandmothers that were in the fishing community are few and far between. We do have a 106-year-old woman, I believe, up in Spruce Head that's still fishing her lobster license, but it's about 10% women now, whereas in the past it's been closer to 2%. So there's this large fleet out there, and 10 of the best years have been in the last 20. And so whereas most fisheries, you hear things like, oh, we've overfished the fishery, the fisheries collapsed. And in many ways, lobster provides the opposite case for that. What we have done in the lobster industry in Maine is nothing short of absolute and total preservation of an industry that has died pretty much everywhere else. Because of this owner-operator industry, because it's a generational fishery, they have self-regulated to the point of putting in V-notches and egg-bearing female tails. They have an upper and lower size limit. They have a trap limit, which basically if you go over the arbitrary state border in the ocean on either side of the state, you see the lobster population drop off. The other, so we're basically aquaculturing lobsters at this point, even though that's not what anyone wants to say we're doing. We're feeding the bottom and reproducing them. But the darker side to that is the other reason why things have gotten so much better in Maine is that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 98% of oceans in the world. And in the past 20 years, we have had the perfect temperature for lobster larvae to survive. And that trend will continue to warm the Gulf of Maine until lobster larvae can no longer survive. So no matter what we have done to conserve the industry, we are going to see increasing volatility year over year as the climate changes, because I think so many people think of climate change as things getting progressively warmer. Nope. Climate change means one year it's boiling and the next year it's freezing. 2 years ago was one of the best years on record. Last year, the Gulf of Maine was 2 degrees Celsius warmer out of nowhere. It wasn't a slow increase, it was a spike, and now it's back down. That did not happen historically, and lobster larvae are not going to be able to survive at the rate that they are now into the future. And we don't know when that's going to happen, and we don't know how. And that's where aquaculture comes in. And I just, to correct a semantic term that you use, Justine, they're not doing it instead of lobstering. They're doing it as a complement to lobstering. It's a supplemental income source. Because if you look at the Gulf of Maine about 20 years ago, it was people were fishing for cod, shrimp, lobster, clams, you know, name your species. People were making full year-round livings that were diversified so that nobody had all of their risks tied up to one thing. And now it's a lobster monoculture. And there's about 7 months of the season. The season that people are usually not fishing unless they're going offshore is the winter. And that's when kelp grows. And it can use all of the same equipment as they can with lobster. And it helps diversify that fishery in the face of climate change. I'll be happy to talk about that more in a second, but I want to make sure that Bo has a chance to answer any questions about lobster that I may have missed.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. You're right on target there. And I just point out one thing. Maybe it's reaching out further into the discussion, but you know, that character of single captain, single business, where each person has their own business, has created the working waterfront on the coast of Maine in a very unique way. And that's what you're seeing with our working. We have 40 lobster boats, and so every lobster boat has a captain, has a stern man, has maybe a secondary person after the stern man, and then the whole family survives and works around that fishery. And so what that's done is create working waterfront unlike anywhere else really in the country, where, as Bree referred to, the consolidation sort of fishing fleets and companies and boat ownership by huge companies and whatnot. The coast of Maine has little pockets of fishermen who fish out of smaller places along the coast. And I'll just add one more thing, is that that's a really big advantage for what Bree is trying to achieve in terms of growing kelp, and what our goal is, because we really have an opportunity to turn infrastructure that we currently have that was used for lobster fishing and dragging for shrimp and et cetera, to use that very, very easily, to use that technology to transfer directly and very easily over to growing aquaculture such as oysters and kelp and whatnot. So that's looking forward into the, what the opportunity is. Bree is on the other side. Atlantic Sea Farms is on the other side of what we're doing. So we're the infrastructure. We're the 2 cranes and a stone dock down on the coast with 40 boats. And she's the one who's purchasing, who's bringing along this whole kelp sort of culture. So it's a really, really exciting time. It is definitely true, is the volatility of all these fisheries is really, really high right now. And income diversification for the fishermen who all have the infrastructure. I'll just emphasize this. They all have their lobster boat. It's the pickup of the sea, as they call it. And, they have good shore facilities, small but very effective, good, good at, sort of access to the markets. And it's really an exciting opportunity. The big thing is that it's the volatility, it's the income opportunities, where if, and you heard in Bree's movie, which was excellent, by the way, you heard people talking about, hey, look, I've got all my eggs in this one basket, and it's the lobster basket. And if anything were to happen, the whole house of cards falls over. And if you think about working waterfront and the cultures and the families and the villages, and I say that word in a theoretical way, the village of these old family ties, these old traditions, if lobstering were to fall away and there would be no other opportunity to do anything else, not only would it hurt the families, but it would hurt the whole culture of mid-coast, of the coastal Maine fishing, of all the towns. I mean, what would people do? There would be growing stress on incomes and families and whatnot. And we've seen, all of us throughout the country have seen what that can do to a culture. So very, very, I'm sort of jumping around here, but very exciting times. When I started my company 7 years ago, I bought my facility you saw in the movie from the co-op members, and they offered to sell it to me because they thought that I would be reasonably safe to sell an asset like that too, because we were going to promote and go forward but keep a strong, respect and a strong presence in the traditional fisheries. And I think that is really key when we all understand this. Have respect for lobsters, have respect for lobster fishermen, for clam harvesters, for whatnot, but also be smart about it. Let's create opportunities for people to really diversify. And Breeze come down and talk to all our fishermen. We have 7 people, 2 people starting out this year, and about 5 or 6 to 7 more who are seeking leases from the DMR to grow kelp for Atlantic sea farms. And the acceptance of this whole concept by the people who really matter, who are the fishermen, is really stupendous. It's amazing how they're really into it. They really want to get into this. They've got all the equipment. All they need is a few lines and a few mushroom anchors, and they're ready to go. So it's what a fit it is. So very exciting times.
Maybe you could talk a little bit more about how each of the 2 of you found your way into this industry at this moment. Or
This is more interesting than mine. You go ahead, Bo.
Well, geez, I don't know. I'm not quite sure actually how it all happened. I just woke up one day and I had mud on my blue jeans. So no, so about 13 years ago, I was helping construct a building down at the lobster dock that I have, and I got to be friends with the fishermen. I mean, this is a long-winded story, so shut me up if I. But anyway, so we got to be friends, and I began to work for them and with them, and sort of bringing their very, very specific lobster culture into a little bit more of the mainstream. And that's trying to get better markets for seafood, and building new lines of business and whatnot. And so then in about 5 years after that, a bunch of them wanted to retire, and they wanted to actually sell their whole facility, which you saw in the movie. And they came to me and said, do you want to buy it? And I said, gosh, I guess so. And so I bought the facility. It's 13 acres of basic working waterfront, covenant working waterfront. And the reason I bought it was my love for this wonderful group of people, number one. And number two is that at that point in time, I was very, very interested in alternative income sources, such as mainly it was oyster aquaculture at that point. And Bree happened to be working at Island Institute at the time, and she and I really had a wonderful, close working relationship about how, her vision of what this could mean and my vision of what this could mean. And so this is very interesting. I mean, Bree and I have known each other for 6, 7 years, and we've always been sort of working together to go along towards this goal. And so that's what's really, really exciting. So just as a note, those lobster pounds, and this will give you an idea that we began to grow oysters in. So I said in the movie they're an obsolete asset. And the reason I say that is because of such a perfect little gem of what's going on. So basically, a lobster pound is a place where the heavy catch of the summer can be stored into the winter months, and where the lobsters can live. And when the water gets below 42 degrees, those lobsters will hibernate and not need to be fed. They just, just like a bear in a cave, they just, lie around until the water warms up. But because of the warming Gulf of Maine, that technology no longer worked. Two things happened. The lobsters never went to sleep during the winter. And number two is the cost of groundfish, another volatile fishery. The cost of groundfish was too expensive to feed the to feed the lobsters in between the time when they went to sleep. So we took that asset, who knows what it's worth, embedded energy galore, and said, hey, what's not great for pounding lobsters is really, really great for growing oysters. And that was our first sort of foray into using what's going on to create a new industry. So is that probably too much information, but anyway, there you go.
I would say for me, it's, my background is in economic development. I was a diplomat for a number of years, and I moved to Maine about 9 years ago. Nope, 11 years ago now. And I started working with the Island Institute, as Bo said, and, there were a lot of conversations about diversification of the lobster industry in the face of climate change. And for me, it felt like seaweed was a perfect opportunity for people to diversify in the face of climate change, with all of the seasonality issues that could be complementary in the same equipment, and the huge market opportunity that there is in seaweed. And then, at that point in time, there were no seaweed buyers at scale anywhere in the United States. About 30,000 pounds of seaweed had been grown in 2018. And so it felt like it was really important that if you can't figure out a way for it to get sold, then you join them, I guess. So I joined the Ocean Approved board at the time, which was the first commercial seaweed farm in the country. The Ocean Approved was the name of the company. In 2018, there was a founder transition, and I was asked to take over as CEO. And then we started Atlantic Sea Farms from the kind of ashes of that company, and really transformed the mission and the goals, focused on getting fishermen diversification opportunities in the face of climate change. And then that's where we ended up. So this is 4 years later, and last year we had 30 partner farmers harvesting 1 million pounds of kelp. And it's really transformed the industry. And now we can say that lobstermen are the leaders in kelp aquaculture in the US, which is pretty exciting.
And very suitable, by the way. Very, yeah.
And what was some of those early conversations, like about oysters and about seaweed? What were those conversations like when you were sort of introducing the idea? How did you first gain traction?
It took people that trusted us, that knew us. And I think, Bo's in the same world in a different way. There was a co-op in Bremen before, and they were trying to figure out how their next step what their next step was. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Maine in the audience, we don't trust people easily here. We don't let people in easily. If you're not from here for like 3 generations, you're from away. It's everything here is relationship building and trust and integrity. And so I had been working with some people in the lobster industry for a number of years, and some of them were real leaders in the industry, and getting them involved, getting them up to speed, and then getting them convinced that they should give us a try for a year. And then when they did well, they spread the word of it. And now it's sort of been a snowball effect because of that, because people can see they can make money and that it works with their income.
Can I just add one thing to what Bree said? And I think this is really important thing. And this is it's all about whether it's oysters or whether it's lobsters or traditional fisheries or whatnot, but it's scalability, which is really, really important. I just wanted to put that word out there. And, you know, we have a lot of little teeny oyster farms and a lot of little teeny kelp farms and whatnot, but it's the consolidators like Bree who give the opportunity by giving scalability. And we're seeing that mainly what Bree's doing in kelp, so important. There's some salmon, you know, farming down east more than around us, really down east. But again, that's a scalability. And you know, the oyster world is looking for scalability now, but there's a lot of little teeny farms, and they need to be able to consolidate. But that's what's really and a very, very important part of not the shore infrastructure, the cranes and the refrigeration and everything else, but the overall infrastructure of a successful business is the ability to scale. And that's one thing that we're really seeing here. And that's why our guys are excited.
Yeah, I'm going to fold in a question from Eliza in the chat, who's asking about whether these aquaculture opportunities have brought people into the industry from the outside. So I am really curious, you know, Bree, you talked about complementing the income from lobstering. So is this about expanding the group of people, the incomes for a set group of people, or are you also seeing that the industry is sort of having a spillover effect?
We are really dogmatic and really hyper focused on working with people who already work on the water. When people contact us and say, I'm a lawyer, I want to move to Maine and start a kelp farm, which happens all the time. And I always say, great, get a 40-foot boat and sit out on it in February for 10 hours and tell me if you still want to be a kelp farmer. Number one. But number two, I think one thing that we do really, really poorly in development is we allow economic development to be focused on the ideas of the marine scientists and the investors of the world, rather than focusing on actually helping people be more resilient in the future. I'm from Pennsylvania originally. I'm from coal country, and everyone's genius solution right now is, oh, cool, well, let's get them into solar, as if people who know how to work in coal mines are also the same people that will be able to make solar just because, hey, it's energy. And people aren't widgets. And we have a force of 4,000 people that know the water better than any marine scientist out there. And we have this crazy competent workforce. And so we are laser focused at providing opportunities for those people to continue to work on water. That's who we are in Maine. And it's who we are at threat of becoming, of not being anymore. We have more unoccupied homes on the coast of Maine than any other state per person. And by unoccupied homes, that means people who come up for 30 days in the summer and look at their beautiful viewscape and then leave it sit there for the other 11 months. Mainers can no longer afford coastal properties. Mainers can no longer afford to live into their communities because they're all being purchased from people from away. And our focus at Atlantic Sea Farms is dogmatic about helping us be who we always have been on the coast of Maine. And that's people who make a living off the water.
And I just want to say add one thing. That's kind of what I was talking about before. It's these very precious and wonderful old, you know, communities that are really benefiting from this. you know, it's giving them legs to go on to the next generation. And I think, I mean, and also as Bree said, the rich, you know, human resource in Maine, which is here, is really a huge asset for what's going to be going on.
Yeah, can I push you a little further on that? I would love to hear, have you been in a situation, or have there been examples of times when knowledge from lobstering, that like this multi-generational knowledge is actually shaped the way that you're approaching, or changed the way that you're approaching kelp farming or oyster farming? Like that knowledge from,
There's no case in which it hasn't.
yeah.
There's not a single thing that we do that isn't informed by that. The way that we harvest kelp, the way that we set up our farms, the way that we recruit, the way that we talk about kelp farming, the way we work with our partner farmers. Every single thing that we do at our company is 100% formed around the idea that we want to have 100 farmers growing 100,000 pounds each by 2030 in the Gulf of Maine. And they're all going to be fishermen. But you know, the training for people, I've seen people talk about kelp farming, like, how do you start? And they think that they're going to be kelp farmers, versus fishermen are like, how big does my mooring need to be? I'm thinking about using cross lines here. Is my mast and boom good enough to pull the rope over? I've seen pictures of this. I'm thinking we could actually harvest differently on my boat. Like, the level of conversation is just so much more sophisticated with people who have made their living on the water for their whole lives and for generations. But also, you know, our whole harvest procedure is based around a lobster boat, which is basically the tractor of the sea. And the number of pallets you can fit on it, the way we stack the bags, the way we harvest the kelp into the bags over a lobster boat's mast and boom. It's not set up for a barge or for some sort of ground fish boat. It's set up for lobster boats.
So I'm also thinking about, you know, the physical landscape and why Maine for kelp and why Maine for oysters. I think going back to Bo's video at the start, like the remains of the coracresse and the structure of the lobster pound was a perfect context to try something different. But I'm curious, in like a larger, you know, the water temperature, the salinity, how you came to kelp as well.
So is that for me?
You know, what makes Maine perfect for kelp, I guess.
Well, I'll start out just a little, because really what we're talking about here, which, so as I referenced before, is that we're talking about sort of industries that, you know, I'm on one side of it and Bree's on the other. And the one thing, as I mentioned before, is that the Maine coast and the fishing community is so unique because of these small harbors of different boats and whatnot. And that's really the perfect setup for what Atlantic Sea Farms is trying to achieve, you know, and a bunch of small proprietary people, families going out and fishing with their equipment that they already have. So because of the lobster industry, all the equipment is there. Because of the lobster, you know, dealerships like mine, is that we've got 2 cranes and a huge stone dock and refrigeration in 4 different spots down in our spot. And there's 100 other people like us. And so the outlets and are all there. Everything, the infrastructure is all there. So I think that's one reason, and Bree can talk about the actual conditions, but I think that's a really, really important part. Bree, what would you think about, you know, in terms of water quality and whatnot? I mean, obviously it's.
Yeah, so water quality, we only plant in areas that are open for growing oysters and mussels, so the cleanest water that there is already. So we don't really improve water quality to say, because we're only planting it in the highest quality of water in the first place, mostly because we're making a really good, clean food product. There are certainly projects that people have been working on, sort of like the Billion Oyster project, where, you know, what Bo's growing has to be in the cleanest, best waters because people are eating the product. There is the Billion Oyster project where they're just reseeding the Hudson, you know, that's not for eating, but similar, there's bioremediation projects with kelp, which does very similar work to oysters. But additionally, what it does do is what scientists are calling a halo effect. Within the halo of the kelp farm, people are growing, you can see, because kelp eats carbon, let me go back a little bit. There's too much carbon in the air. The ocean absorbs that carbon when it hits the top of the ocean. That results in what we call ocean acidification. The effects of ocean acidification are completely unknown. We have no idea what they're going to do for most of the species in the ocean because there are so many organisms in the ocean, and this is such a new thing in the ocean ecology. What we do know is that it does negatively affect shell-bearing organisms. As you would imagine, you throw a bunch of Pepsi on a rusty, I mean, on a piece of metal, it will turn rusty. Similar because of the acidity. Similar, when the ocean is more acidic, it wears down in shell-bearing organisms. Most people think of oysters, mussels, clams, those kind of things, which it certainly has an effect on, but it's also phytoplankton, which is a shell-bearing organism that provides a large part of the oxygen that we actually breathe in the air. So when kelp is planted within the kelp halo of the farm, kelp removes carbon from the ocean there because it is absorbing that carbon, and removes nitrogen from the ocean there and makes the area within that halo less acidic. It means it basically creates a system for those shell-bearing organisms to not have to be constantly rebuilding their shell. And in a 6-month period, we have found with our work at Bigelow Labs and Bangs Island Mussels in southern Maine that in a 6-month period, the shell strength was almost double as strong just within the kelp halo. And the meat was also larger, likely because it wasn't putting the energy into rebuilding its shell, but also because it was likely feeding from the detritus that was falling from the kelp. So we can't really single out what that muscle meat density came from, but it's one of those two things or both. So we know it has a positive effect on the ocean. It's also grown with no arable land, no fresh water, no pesticides. So when you're eating kelp, you're replacing it with like lettuce or any other, you know, greens that are on your plate. You're eating a much more carbon friendly, environmentally friendly product on your plate and replacing anything else that would otherwise be in its spot. So lettuce, cauliflower, all those things. They're using water, they're using pesticides, they're using arable land. Most people don't realize arable land and tilling that land is one of the big contributions to carbon in the atmosphere. So we're providing the most climate friendly food on the planet. And that's how it's improving the ocean. Now, I do just want to make a statement that we are not sequestering carbon. So be very, very skeptical of those in aquaculture and those in kelp that are talking about sequestration. Sequestering carbon is a long process that means that carbon gets trapped and goes away for, you know, a lot of time. If you are eating kelp, if you're putting it on and you're using it as fertilizer, using it as skincare, using it as shampoo, using it in bioplastics, using it anything, it is being recycled back into the environment, but it is mitigating some of the effects of climate change. In the meantime, it is replacing very carbon intensive other products, and it's helping fishermen adapt to climate change, and that's its effect.
Thank you. I think if there are questions from the group that you want to put in the chat, I just want to make some time for that as we get close to the hour. I think that's amazing just to think about being able to study the local impacts on the water quality and even the way that oysters and other shellfish are growing within the halo effect of the kelp. So I want to keep looking forward. I think we have a few minutes left, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're working on now and like what are your next steps.
Go ahead, Bo.
Oh yeah, we just basically right now. I mean, we've got great direction in aquaculture. One of the things we're doing, which is kind of fun and very productive, is we're working with University of Maine on our aquaculture, and we've got a number of initiatives going forth. We're working with kelp with Bree, but we're also looking into mussel aquaculture. We're looking into hard clam aquaculture. We're also one thing is a big issue in Maine here is riparian rights and square foot water usage for aquaculture, and there's a little bit of a competition between riparian, which means the people who own the shorefront, with line fishing like lobstering, and with aquaculture on the use of the actual square foot of the water surface, of the ocean surface. So one of the things we're looking into is how to use more of the water column in terms of aquaculture, in terms of oyster aquaculture in this sense, and how we can grow more per square foot of ocean surface in the water column. So that's a really exciting thing we're doing. I think it's more technological than it is scientific. But we keep on making opportunities for our fishermen in obviously we've discussed kelp, but also in oysters, in mussels, in a whole bunch of different things. So that's really what we're doing. We're sort of keeping on and sort of on this line to really try to make our company and be a model for others to be sort of a real hub for aquaculture and for new technologies. So that's what we're really doing. And that's what we've always kind of been doing. And we muddle along as best we can. And we're finally getting a little bit of traction here. So it's really exciting. So
That is really exciting, Bo. And for us at Atlantic Sea Farms, we're just expanding our footprint for people to be able to buy our products. So you can buy our products at Whole Foods, Sprouts, Wegmans. Albertsons just launched our blueberry kelp cubes this week. Hy-Vee also launches our burgers next week. Really, really excited about getting our products out there, because the more people buy them, the more kelp I can, the more farmers I can get into the water to farm this beautiful product. So that's what we're laser focused on, building out this demand in this market.
can I say one thing, Bree? What's that your beautiful jarred seaweed mixtures? Seaweed salad and sichi, right?
Yeah,
There's
we have a fermented seaweed salad, a fermented seaweed kimchi, and then a brand new spicy gochujang seaweed salad that just launched last month, excuse me. So you can buy them basically anywhere you buy your groceries at natural and organic chains. So
let me tell you, this is, and this is not a pitch. This stuff is good. I mean, everybody's skeptical, if you're new at this, Bree deals with this every day, but try this stuff. It is so good. When I open a jar of sichi, I eat the whole jar. I mean, I really do. You can't put it down. It's really good.
Thank you. Yeah, it is
good.
addicting. And that's the idea, is we get people really excited about kelp first for the climate impacts, but then they have to go back for the taste. You're only going to buy something for the story once. But you'll buy things over and over if it also tastes good. So
good, and good for you.
I'll answer Alex's question in the chat. Alec, we are entirely investor owned at this point. I don't have any of my own independent capital. So while we're women run, unfortunately we're not women owned. But it's all impact investments. So it's people who are really at the nexus of profit and impact, because the reality is, unless we make this business a success, we haven't proven that you can do well by doing good. And so I have an incredible group of investors and shareholders and board members that have been operators in the impact space, have built beautiful companies like Vital Farms, Tasty Bite, which is the Indian organic food company. Just some really incredible people who are helping us get where we need to be in order to amplify our impact.
think there's also a second part of that question that's really interesting, like thinking back to the scale of these owner operators that as we spoke about at the beginning. Like the part where Alec is asking about equity back to lobstermen. Is that something that could be in the future?
Yeah, it definitely could. I mean, I think what's really cool about our model too is we don't own their farms, they do. They are complete and 100% independent owners of their farms. And that is one of the keys to our success, is that we trust them and rely on them, and they trust us and rely on us. There's no kind of imbalance of power here. But certainly I think, you know, as we grow, the share price gets a little rich for people to jump in on from the lobstering community, but we are and have been actively looking for ways to create opportunities for fishermen to be shareholders of the company without having to invest in the equity of it. So stay tuned on that.
In my case, the lobstermen sold their company to me, so I don't think they want to get back in right now. So no, it's same. It's, you know, we're sort of the conduit on the coast, and I think everybody's happy to share in the bounty of being where we are and do what we are. My company is family owned by my family, so that's the way we do it here. So
Thank you both. I think the question of scale is so interesting, right? Like the dispersion across the coast at this small scale, but the ability to bring it together through distribution, through branding, through processing, to be able to reach a national market. Yeah, I
yeah,
think,
and,
you know, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just want to point out, and this is it's to bring it to, you know, on a national scale, and, you know, to go back to what we were just talking about, give the actual producers the most important piece in this model is the fishermen, right? Is the guys who are out growing it, and to give back to them this opportunity instead. You know, traditionally Maine has been a place where wild caught fisheries, lobsters, clams, whatever, you know, has all gone into a very dark sort of network whereby there's many different brokers as this beautiful commodity passes hands and hands and hands, and, you know, usually the least common denominator in terms of getting paid has been the fishermen, but that is all changing because of models like Breeze and different models that we're promoting as well. I'd say we have a distribution place down in Connecticut right now in Fairfield County, whereby we're taking a lot of that value added that would have been lost along the network into Boston or whatever, and we're keeping that value added and able to pay our fishermen a lot more for their beautiful commodities. And I think that's exactly what Bree is saying too. And they pay if she doesn't mind me saying, they pay very fair prices for their kelp. And that's a really, really big thing. That's part of giving back and sharing and you know, making everybody the winner here, not just the
In addition to the prices for kelp, we also provide technical assistance. We do their leases with them. We provide free seed every year. So it's exactly as Bo said, that there needs to be partnership, and we need to all do this together.
Yeah,
it's a new way of looking at things that's very valuable.
thanks so much. I think we have just a couple more minutes, so I wonder if there's anything that either of you want to add to this conversation that you feel like we've missed or should have touched on.
I don't think so. I really appreciate you bringing us here today, and I always love being on panels with Bo. He's really inspiring to me.
Same here. Back at you, Bree. Honestly, you know, I'll just say one last thing, and I just want to drive a couple things home. What we're talking about here is the perfect solution to maintain good good social structure in the working waterfront. And it's a new way of being able to preserve families and dynamize working waterfront, bring in new things, and really energize for the future what needs to happen. And I think that's so valuable. So you have, again, the pieces interlock, whereby, and we've said all this before, but it's so valuable where we have these very complex and deep family structures and village of the community, and it's desperately looking with the volatility of fisheries of wild caught. It's so valuable to give a new avenue to be able to maintain this lifestyle, and this is what's so incredibly exciting for everybody, including from Bree to me to the fishermen to the DMR to the government of Maine to everybody who's sort of really we're out in front of it in Maine here too. That's another thing. We've got the universities, the DMR, the government, everybody is really out in front of this whole situation. And it's admirable because, as Bree said, the lobster industry is still really healthy. The catches are still, coming in records. And so to be out in front of it like this is really, really encouraging and reassuring. So.
I mean, to my mind, it's an incredible example of how collaboration and forward-looking diversification can maintain the industry. And I hope other places and other sectors looking at Maine aquaculture and lobstering, Maine fishing, to see how they can grow and thrive and sustain. The piece of using the equipment, using the infrastructure, the knowledge I think you've really touched on every aspect of what made the Maine lobstering industry the success that it has been. Okay, so I think we have to wrap up. We're at the top of the hour. Bree and Bo, thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with us today.